Hi there, and welcome to Parents Using Human Design, the podcast for conscious parents who are unlearning the old ways and rewriting the rules with self-trust, intuition, and a whole lot of grace. I'm Courtney.
And I'm Bryn, and we're just two moms exploring what it means to parent with presence, permission, and the wisdom of human design as our compass.
Whether you're brand new to human design or deep in your experiment, this space is for you.
We're not here to tell you how to parent. We're here to support you in becoming more you so you can raise your kids with more ease, connection, and authenticity.
Bryn and I are here today, and we were just talking about human design. Well, deconditioning as parents from the lens of human design. And I think that this is a fascinating topic because as parents, you can probably relate to this because every parent I know can relate to this of wanting to be the best for our children, right? Wanting them to have what we didn't have growing up, wanting to make sure that we don't quote unquote impart trauma onto them. And that's not what this is about at all. This is about they're going to have trauma. They're going to go through crap in their life. And that's part of growing up. That's part of living. That's part of just being a human. And this episode is all about that because we tend to do that. We tend to go to this extreme of, I have to be the best. I have to do this, that my kids cannot experience hardship or what are the other words I'm looking for, Bryn? They can't experience hardship. And that's just not true. And we want to like debunk that a little bit because we tend to like overdo. So we overgive, we overdo, we overcompensate is the word that Bryn used. And where can we be careful of that? Where can we just be aware and my words are losing me right now. I'm lost.
I'm running on another like 4:30 a.m. wake up sign day. So I get it. Yeah. And the power of using a tool like human design is that we can then start to see pretty specifically where that conditioning has happened and how that might be showing up in your day to day, but then also how we might be, wrestling with some of the energetic dynamics with our children. But this is, I think, we really wanted to turn this inward toward the parent more than looking at our kids, because there is that tendency to say, and we've talked about this in the past, right? The tendency to say, here's their design. I'm going to raise them exactly by their design. Like, no, you must experiment with this thing because you have a 3-line, right? It's like we want so badly to facilitate, I don't know, I almost wanted to say like a normal upbringing. There is no such thing, but you know what I mean? Like a healthy environment for them. We want to facilitate healthy relationships with themselves, with their surroundings, with other people, right? But we can't do that necessarily unless we are doing the work ourselves. And so we've talked a lot about self-care and letting go of control and ways that we can be really intentional about that. I think today we wanted to shift a little bit just to talk a little bit more about how we can look to the chart and see these places where we may have been conditioned in a way that is really affecting our day-to-day with our kids. And so oftentimes that looks like looking at the undefined places. So anywhere in your chart that's white, that's not colored in, and that's usually the center. So any of those shapes, the triangles or squares or diamonds that are undefined, we can start to look to those places. But a lot of times this actually happens really powerfully when we start sort of just taking, even like if you don't know much about human design, just like a first glance at high level your chart versus your partner's and or your children or child, right? And look at how, like, what places are you defined or colored in, and where are they defined and colored in, and how those might be different, so that you can start to just kind of feel into like, oh, wow, in my chart, for example, my daughter and I both have a lot of definition in the mental area. We have a lot of mental activity. Now she has some down in her body and I do not. So I can say, oh gosh, I can see these places where a mental activity might be mirrored and we might butt heads because we both are so certain, or we're more defined, right? We're more consistent in the way that we show up in that mental activity. Yet she has this visceral knowing in her body, right? And how might I be reacting to her definition, her energy, where might I be picking up and experiencing life differently, or where might I be putting my belief systems that I've gathered through my wide range of experience and openness, right? Being undefined, and how might I see things different. So for example, she's got a defined sacral center as a generator, and I do not. Like, what beliefs am I carrying that about a sacral being that I'm placing on her? Like, you should just have all the energy in the world. We had a super lazy day last weekend, and I had to keep reminding myself, like, it's okay for us, my little generators, to have a lazy day. Like, because I have my story of like, I need these days, but I'm not forcing it on them, right? Because I need it. And I also have to recognize that, they're not just little energizer, they are energizer bunnies, but not always, right? That there's a lot of things going into it. So by contrast, my son only has definition in the very bottom of the chart. So sacral, root, spleen, and it's totally open. I mean, like, he has a lot of openness in the mental. So I'm thinking more of like head, ajna, even into the throat center. So how is that playing in, and where am I, again, bringing my beliefs or my reactionary behaviors, and thinking about that, but really with a focus not on their charts as much as just like, oh, okay, well, where am I sort of emitting energy? Where am I more likely to be conditioned? And as someone with 7 undefined centers, for better or worse, that's a lot of places, but we can also, let's remind everyone here, you can also be conditioned in your defined centers as well. So let's say you have a defined throat. We've talked about the throat center. You could have been conditioned as being too much, right? And to bring it down a little bit because you talk too much, or you have a funny way of speaking, or whatever the case is. So just because you're defined doesn't mean you won't be conditioned. But anyway, that's a good starting point. So I'm just going to leave that there and then let you respond.
Yeah, no, I love, because I know you've said it before, but I think that it's something that I need to hear often, and probably other people do too, of like, you can be conditioned in any center, in any area of your chart of your life, but the open centers and the open areas of your chart are maybe where you should go to look first to determine like conditioning versus your design, right? That's what you're saying, yeah. Just to like confirm that. And then a couple of things that came up when you were talking is just that, I think it's really important in this topic to kind of define what trauma actually means, right? Because I think it can be a very misunderstood concept. And you don't have to have these big events that happened that is a cause of trauma, quote unquote, in order to experience trauma in your life, right? So let's backtrack to like childhood for a minute. And your parents, so you know what this is like. Your kid is freaking out about something. Maybe they scraped their knee on the tree that they were climbing, or they stubbed their toe, or their dog, laid on them. Like, whatever these things that seem so insignificant to us, but they're a big deal to them because their world is, everything is big to them, right? Because they're small and just everything is big. I think that I'm probably speaking to because my kids have big emotions, and I don't know, not every kid does have big emotions, but something that seems so insignificant up to us can actually be a source of trauma for them. So if you think about, let me backtrack. I'm getting way ahead of myself. Trauma is not necessarily what happened to you. Okay. Trauma is what happens after, how you respond to it. So if you have amazing coping skills and you had this horrific thing happen to you and you're able to move through it and process through it and you're not going to be as traumatized as if you didn't have these coping skills, right? And to be able to move through it, it gets stuck. And it's actually like more wildly important for what happens after the trauma than what the actual trauma is. And I've learned that through my own traumatic experiences and trying to process them and not knowing my traumas until I was freaking 40 years old. So there's that. And I want you to think about a time, maybe something that shows up in your current day that you still react to, of like, I hate heights, or I'm afraid of snakes, or I can't stand to do this thing, or I don't like to eat this, whatever it is for you, right? Like, I'm thinking the top of the thing that comes to my mind is my mother-in-law. For some reason, she's deathly afraid of snakes. And I don't know that she had anything happen as a kid, but for some reason, she's afraid of snakes. And it could have been as simple as her brother coming with a rubber snake and scaring the crap out of her one night, right? And then she just took that on and wasn't able to process it, wasn't able to work through it. And now for the rest of her life, she's been deathly afraid of snakes. And I laugh and joke about it because I think we have to like have some levity and humor in talking about trauma, because it can feel really heavy a lot of the time. So I think that that's really important to just remember that when I say your kids are going to be traumatized, no matter what you do, it's inevitable. Like them having these experiences that create these big emotions and us not necessarily recognizing it in the moment and them not being able to process it in the moment. There's just going to be things throughout life that cause this reaction, if that makes sense.
And to clarify, you're saying, we're talking about the nervous system reaction and then it getting stuck.
Exactly.
Getting stuck in that fight or flight. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, I was trying not to giggle because you were like, I'm thinking of my mother-in-law, and I thought you were going to say like, that's a big trauma for me. Like my mother-in-law.
That's so funny.
Anyway.
I went a different direction.
She listens. Hi, if she does.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good, I love that you're clarifying that, because the nervous system, I think that's also a huge misunderstanding, in that our nervous system, we hear it talked about all the time as this buzz thing, right? Of like fight, flight, fawn, whatever, all these terms. And we're not trying to make sure either our nervous system or our kids' nervous system is never reactive, right? That's not what that's about. Our nervous system is there for a reason. It's there to keep us safe. And that's where the fight flight comes from, right? If you are literally in danger of your life, you want your nervous system to be reactive. You want your nervous system to make your pupils bigger and increase your heart rate so that you can get away from whatever the situation is that you're trying to get away from. The problem lies in that it gets stuck. Like you said, Bryn, it happens where we get all fired up and then we don't know how to process it. And we continue to stay in that heightened state. And then to add on top of that, not just from an experience necessarily, but because of the chaos of the world, we don't give our nervous systems a chance to really breathe and calm down, right? Because that's really important too. When you get heightened, it's very important to allow your nervous system to come back down. What happens in our current day world is we get heightened and then we just keep going, and it just stays heightened for the rest of the day, because what else are we going to do? We have to keep moving forward. We have all the things to do. We got to work. We got all the things coming at us. So it can be really challenging to like, let's allow our bodies to have a minute and recalibrate and come back to, I'm trying to think of a term that would make sense to people, but I like to think of it as like window of tolerance, of come back to this place of being calm and grounded. Thanks for clarifying that and asking. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Where do we go from here?
So I'm in this program right now where I'm studying family dynamics, specifically parenting and family dynamics with human design specifically. And so I'm like actively trying not to just like regurgitate everything that I'm learning. At the same time, one of the things that I find that has been so valuable that my mentor in that program has been having us do is to also pull the charts of our parents and start to look at us as the child, right? So it's so easy to kind of like look at your kids' charts and be like, okay, let me figure out my kids, and like, let me figure out what is the best thing for them. And by default, we sort of forget sometimes, I think, to then look at ourselves in that way. Like, what did our child version, child me, my inner child, what did they really need? And then how was our parent designed, or how were our parents designed? And you can start to see, even without a lot of expertise or stuff, you don't have to like go into and know the entire human design system. That's not what it's about. Again, just kind of the same thing that you would do with your kids of like, oh, let me just see how different or how similar I have a lot of openness and they have a lot of definition, or vice versa, what those differences are. And then you can start to look at your parents and start to maybe even bring in a little bit of compassion or understanding at the very least of how you might have been raised in a way that didn't necessarily work for you. And I'm saying this around more day-to-day things, not like the big T traumas, right? Because that's not in the chart. Dysfunction like that is not in the chart necessarily. Because mental illness is not in the chart. And so that's like a separate conversation. But for the, like if you see, for example, we've been talking about some of the more nuanced stuff in terms of the arrows at the top. But you can kind of look and see there's something called determination. This is how your body digests food and how your mind digests information, or we could look at environment. I know we've kind of maybe touched on, I don't know if we've talked about digestion yet. We may have to do an episode.
Yeah.
But we've kind of talked about a little bit here and there about environment. So you could kind of look and see, and then we can say, oh gosh, if your parents have, let's say, hot and cold seems like really easy. And I have hot, my husband and my daughter have hot digestion. I have cold, you have cold, Courtney. So it's like, okay, I need cold foods, right? Or body temperature or lower, versus them who need to eat a hot meal. So even at just like a very high level, we could look at that and say, oh gosh, well, if I have cold, but my parent has hot, and my mom always said, you got to sit down and eat dinner while it's hot, right? These are the simple day-to-day things where we might find certain conditioning. Other places are like root center. I'm very sensitive to root center energy, which is sort of the get up and go energy, because I'm completely open. I have no definition at all in the root center. So even when I'm with you, Courtney, you have it defined, and it's like, I feel like, okay, we got to get this going. Like we got to get up and go. I'm very sensitive to it. So if I had a parent who had your root center defined, which I did, and it was always like, gotta be on time, like, right. Or maybe they were totally uninterested in time, disinterested, like, and then how am I receiving that? So we can look at these different areas in the chart and how are the different kids. And now when you have multiple kids, it's hard to accommodate all of these nuanced things. So this is not about being perfect, as we often say, like, this is not about getting it quote right. Even we're all doing our best. However, I do think that with this sort of framework and this information, we can tailor things, or we can have a little bit more compassion and a little bit more understanding, give ourselves more grace, and start to maybe let go of some of the conditioning for ourselves. And I've noticed that coming up as I've looked at my parents' charts and then my kids' charts and started thinking about the dynamic within families. One of the things that I had this aha is that my cognition, and again, I'm going to throw out some terms here that are like very more advanced, okay, in terms of human design. I don't want you to stress about it if you don't know anything about it. This is just an example I'm giving because it's top of mind, and I can't think of anything simpler, to be quite honest, because this just happened yesterday. But I have a really hard time with mess. We talked in our episode about letting go of control. Like, I have a really hard time with mess. And I had a little aha yesterday around my cognition, which is kind of like my, a little bit of an intuitive superpower. So everybody has one. Mine is touch. And so my aha was like, oh, I am actually physically deeply sensitive to the feeling on my skin. And so when I'm dirty, that really affects me. When my kids are dirty, that does not really affect them. They don't, to me, I'm like, there's a house rule. If we change a sheet, if there's clean sheets, like the first 2 nights, you must have a bath before bed. Like everybody in the house has a shower or a bath before bed. That's just me, because I cannot imagine. And there are probably some people laughing in agreement and some people laughing and like, oh my gosh, that doesn't bother me at all. Right. Like, I cannot imagine being able to tolerate the feeling of clean fabric on dirty skin. I just cannot imagine. Like, to me, it's so right. And sure, there's probably some other conditioning and maybe some like neurodiversity things going on there as well. But this is just one of the pieces where I'm like, oh, I don't need to take it so seriously for my kids because it doesn't affect them. And then I can also communicate this to them, where I have these conversations. Like, we were cooking yesterday and my daughter wanted to help. And I was like, oh, we talked about that in the letting go and control episode. And she was mixing something. And I was like, well, just try not to like spill it, because that's my instinct. And also at the same time, I had to laugh because I came over and some of the stuff was spilling out and she was stirring. And I was like, oh, and I made that sound and she looked at me and she was like, take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. Right. Because that's our conversation. And I've communicated to her, messy is mom's thing. Like, not being messy is it's my thing. That's not a you thing. That's a me thing. That has nothing to do with you. You're a kid. You're allowed to be messy.
Yeah.
Right. And so she knows like, oh, mom's just doing her weird thing again. Take a deep breath. Cause that's our communication that we've had of, okay, this is mom's thing. Here's how I'm going to learn to regulate my emotions. I'm going to walk to the room. I'm going to take a break. I'm going to take a deep breath. Right. So we know that we have these toolkits that we can go to use. But again, as in terms of deconditioning, it really is this area where I'm like, oh, I can actually let go of some of that need to not be messy because it is such a me thing. And here's why. And there's almost like a validation to it as well. So
Absolutely. I have to like backtrack to that story and just like give you like acknowledgement in having the conversations with her, right? And
oh, thank you.
having the dialogue between the two of you to say like this is a mommy thing, it has nothing to do with you, but I know it can feel like it does sometimes, and like just so you know, if this happens, this is me, it's not you. And she's taking that and she's running with it and like trying to help calm you down in the moment of like knowing that, oh, mom doesn't like this, she's gonna do her thing. I just freaking love that. Like, good job. Like, seriously, just like I'm cheering you on. I get so excited with
Thank
like,
you. Of course, then I go into like, well, I was the parent in my home and I don't want her to feel like she needs to be the parent. So I'm looking at like the next layer of it, of course. But yeah, it is that communication, right? And then the permission to me to be the way I can be deeply sensitive and I can be okay with it. And sure, it might seem weird to other people,
yeah.
right? And in that knowing of like, oh, this is just one of the ways that I'm designed. And hey, look, my son, my child is not designed that way. They maybe are designed a different way. So let's like a more simple example would be like the emotional center, right? So maybe one person in the family has it defined and one does not, right? So the one that doesn't is picking up the emotions and feeling more, and also almost seems more emotional, right? And you can go back and listen to that episode if you haven't, and that would be helpful if you don't know what I'm talking about. But if I'm a parent with a defined emotional center and I have a child with an undefined emotional center, I can be aware of like, oh, when I'm in a mood, it's affecting, they're feeling it, they're picking up on it. And then I can manage that appropriately, right? I can communicate about it. I also don't have to feel bad that I'm having big feelings, right? And then depending on the age of your kids, it's like, and then speaking to your child, it's like, you get to like, I see you're having these feelings. I'm wondering, how much of it is coming from me? Or do you think this is yours? Is this your feeling? Do you want to take a break? I'm trying to think yes, no questions for the generators and open-ended questions. Like, how are you feeling? What do you think about the feelings that you're feeling? Right. These different kinds of questions. And then also depending on their age, you can just help navigate that of like, oh, I'm having these big feelings and they just are, and it has nothing to do with you. So that they're not, because a lot of times children who are undefined in the emotional center become very acute at sensing and picking up on the emotional tone in the room. And if the parent is not aware, then then it can get really out of control, but then the kid can really start to feel like, oh, I need to walk on eggshells, or I need to be really careful, right? Their nervous system goes on heightened alert because they're just trying to anticipate what's going to happen. So when we can take ownership of the way that we are designed, then we can start to decondition in these places, or continue to decondition in places, or have awarenesses, self-compassion, and also then the dialogue and the maybe modified behavior that is more healthy for our children.
Absolutely. So good. When you were talking about like the emotional center and the open versus the defined, and I'm like, oh, this is like, I'm learning so much about me. And just because I know my son who's 10 has an open and I'm defined, and like, yes, like what you spoke is like exactly the dynamic. And I hadn't ever really looked at it from that perspective before of, I know that like they can sense it. Even like people say like they feel it 10 times more than you do, right?
Yes.
Like it's like they feel it so much more than you do. So even though it's your emotion, they're feeling it and they can name it almost before you can, which is crazy. And it can cause issues. Like with my husband, he's undefined emotional center as well. And our entire relationship would always be able to name my emotions before I ever could. And it would make me so angry. Like, no, I'm not angry right now. Like, stop telling me what I am. But he was always right. Anyway, I'm digressing, but
no, I mean, it's such a good point. And I think one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves and our children is to understand the difference between a defined and undefined emotional center, and then how to work with it. Because as an undefined emotional center, I never knew that all the things that I was feeling were not necessarily mine.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. And I just thought and then it becomes that, like, what happened? What's wrong with me? What am I feeling? And going into, and I'll say, my mom's probably listening, so sorry, mom, but, when she would have depressive bursts, or maybe it was just prolonged, right? Like, I would be depressed and I would feel this, and it didn't, the anxiety built and the depression built. And then when I got into college and I was out of the home, right, then it became a whole different dynamic, because I didn't have this consistent, person or people, right, even siblings affecting me. However, I did have roommates. So then it becomes like this whole different dynamic. And then it became, and it took several years of regulating, and then another probably decade before I even learned human design to know,
Totally. Yeah.
or even other, modalities and skills to say, like, hey, like, you don't have to hold on to all the emotions. And so, and it's not that my mom was malicious and was like, I'm not teaching you about, emotional regulation. It's just when they're not taught and their parents aren't taught, you know what I mean? Is anyone capable?
Exactly.
Now that we are having these conversations and we have these tools,
that brings up two things for me right now. Like, I think that our generation has been called to do this work, and we have more knowledge, more resources than any other generation before us. And like, yes, and we're stepping up to the plate now, right? Like, that's why we're having this conversation. And it's not to put blame on our parents or our grandparents for not knowing these things. Like, it just is what it is, and there's nothing that they could have done about it. And I love that that's coming up. And then number two, I'm really curious what your thoughts are on, because as an unemotional, as a undefined emotional
unemotional, I wish.
I know. I know. You talk about like the taking on other people's emotions as your own, and I'm obviously a defined emotional center, but I also identify as an empath, and I can very much feel other people's emotions. So what's your experience with that? Like, what's the dynamic there?
In terms of what?
Like empath versus undefined emotional center.
Yeah, well, so the emotional, so I have a few things, right? Like, we have all of these centers. We have a few different awareness centers as well in human design. And so you're going to be able to pick up on emotional awarenesses, mental awarenesses, and intuitive awarenesses. So there is that. So we're looking at some other centers there. But if we keep it, to the emotional center, for example, by the way, I just want to say again, we talked about the conditioning of the undefined emotional center, right? And so that's oftentimes like, you're too emotional, I remember being told at 4 or 5 years old in kindergarten, I got it on a report card that I cried too easily. And I remember thinking, well, then I'll never cry again.
Yeah.
And I did, of course, but like, I really didn't. Like, for the most part, I would stifle. So I think there is conditioning around that of like, let's not feel the emotion so deeply, or not knowing and just being tossed around in like an ocean of emotion, because you don't know what's yours and what's not. Now, conversely, I just wanted to touch on this really quick, Courtney. When you are defined in your emotional center, you can still be conditioned. And what that looks like a lot of times is like this intense judgment of, oh, you're too moody, and that the moods are wrong. Because the difference is really like, the call is coming from inside the house. When you have a defined emotional center, it's like, you just feel things because you feel things. It's not because anything outside of you. Like, you could be having the best day externally, but still feel heavy because you're just going through that wave. And that's just what that is. Or maybe there's some activation in the transits or something, you know what I mean? So you're just feeling that way. And so there is a wrongness, right? Like, a lot of times with kids, it's like, you don't want any emotion, because then it's our generation is what I'm saying. And generations before us.
Yeah.
There's like, you can't have emotions. Like, kids are supposed to be seen and not heard. And, don't make waves, or don't throw a tantrum in the store. Oh my gosh. Like, don't throw a tantrum in the store. Right. And so if you're just feeling that way, or you're not feeling social, or you're not your usual self or whatever, there can be conditioning around that as well. So, I don't know if I'm answering what was the original question?
It was like the empath versus I know you have to explain the conditioning part of it for sure. That's wildly important, but yeah, the empath versus the undefined.
Well, so again, I don't think everything, for me personally, I don't think now some human design purists might disagree. So potentially at some point we'll have other opinions on here if we ever did guess or whatever. But in the emotional center, you're certainly going to see an undefined emotional center as being very sensitive to the emotions of others around them, being very empathic. Again, the splenic center, I would say as well, if that is undefined, that's going to feel like you're really empathic as well. The ajna, if that's undefined, you're going to feel like it just comes in a different way. It might not be that emotional empathy, but like that understanding, right? The deep understanding of other people. So if if you're a projector, you might, in your projectorness, be able to see people and then be feeling like you're empathic because of that ability. So I think we could go and pull different, there's going to be gates as well. So certainly you'll see gate 19, you'll see gate 27. These are like very in tune with other people. Gate 19 is it's down in the root center. It's the gate of sensitivity. So that gate is like very sensitive to criticism, but it's very picking up on these energies and is reaching for the emotional center. So it's looking for that emotion too. So that's going to be empathic. Gate 27 is like nourishing and it wants to take care of people. So it's very deeply in tune with what people need. So again, you could describe that as empathic.
Totally, 100%. Yeah. So what I'm hearing, I mean, obviously there's a lot of nuance to all of this. And with anything with human design, it's like just taking what resonates, what doesn't. And you don't have to dig into all the pieces to understand different little things about yourself, your kids, your parents. I love that you're like working on bringing your parents' chart into it, because like you said, they had their own conditioning, but like the day-to-day, like their conditioning could have caused some big T trauma stuff in your own world. And but the
same as nature though too.
Yeah, totally, 100%.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're fine. Like I just love the conversation of the flow of this, and like there's not like a defined answer to any of it. It's not about like this black and white, right? Human design is not about black and white. It's just like helping you learn and understand yourself from a place of what's my conditioning, what's not my conditioning, what am I designed to be, my kids, what's going on there, my parents, what's going on there. And some place that I've gotten to recently is because I've done a lot of work around this, right? Of really figuring out what is my design? Like, what did I come here on earth to be? And what is my conditioning, right? And this is probably common for a lot of people in that it's not black or white. It is literally intertwined and combined, and it all is. So
yeah,
that for what you want. And when I say that out loud, it sounds so woo-woo, Bryn. It sounds so out there. I can just picture my husband being like, what is this you're talking about?
Yeah. No, I get it. One of my favorite Eckhart Tolle quotes is that, how do you know that this experience is for the evolution of your soul? Because this is the experience you're having.
Yeah. I love that. Yes, exactly.
So. And when it comes to human design, yeah, again, you're right. It's totally an experiment. I know we need to wrap up. So I'll finish my part by saying, I don't want anybody to feel overwhelmed. I still get overwhelmed with human design. I've been studying this intensely for 4 years or more. What I would say is like each time you come to a piece of it, like we talked about emotional center today, maybe you look at that and then you just take that one little piece and we look at it. And of course, it's a part of the whole, right? But just take it one little piece at a time. Are there any ahas? Are there any nuggets of wisdom in there? Are there any similarities that you can see with your children, places where we can create a little bit more harmony from that one little piece? And then maybe next time it's your profile, or maybe next time, you know what I mean? Your type.
Exactly.
So it doesn't have to be so complex from that place. It's just, we can just take one piece at a time and also still hold the awareness that like, this is one part of the whole. This isn't the end all be all. So if I feel like I'm effing up by having too big of emotions, right? Like there are other things that we're getting right too.
Yeah, totally. I love that. Just like the baby steps, take little pieces at a time. And that's what growth is. That's what learning is. That's what deconditioning is. That's what healing is. That's what, I had a mentor recently say, I I don't remember the words that she was using, but I'm thinking of it from terms of healing right now is like I'm healed and I'm healing. Like there are so many parts that I've healed and I'm still healing. And I think that's just, yeah, that's a good point
Beautiful.
to end with too, Bryn. Thanks so much for listening. If today's conversation sparked something for you, we'd love to hear it. Come find us on Instagram and let us know what resonated.
And if you're loving the show, would you please leave a review or share it with a friend? It helps more conscious moms find this space and feel less alone on this path.
Until next time, keep listening to your body, trusting your energy, and parenting in a way that feels true to you.
You're doing better than you think. See you next time.